caskets keep arriving. And the Kursk thing has spread throughout the population, if only because people in Kursk say, can I have a bedroom? I've just been kicked out by the Ukrainians of my house. So they haven't been able to control the messaging on that. But Putin's enormously powerful. Putin doesn't go unless he's forced to. And he has to be forced to by the inner circle. And there is discontent. The oligarchs don't have the power to remove him, but the inner circle, the Siloviki, they call them, they can do that.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. And this time we're joined by Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics, including the war in Ukraine and Putin's Russia. Diane, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us. You've written in recent days on the current equivocation about granting Ukraine permission to fire its Western-supplied Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia. What effect do you think this very public debate and delay is having on Ukraine's allies and on Russia?
Well, I think that I don't know if it's going to affect Russia until the bombs start to fly, but it's a very important debate. This is really kind of a reason behind the tedious stalemate war that's underway now. The more that they can harm the energy infrastructure and the military infrastructure deep inside Russia, the better off they're going to be in terms of defending themselves and even inching forward to regain some of the property, some of the lands they've lost. So it's a key strategy. But the Americans are very concerned that, and Putin has warned that this he would regard this as an attack by NATO, and then therefore the war would escalate into a NATO versus Russia war, which is something that nobody really wants. On the other hand, what the British Prime Minister has been arguing, and he's done a bit of a crusade, he's hopping from capital to capital to talk to leaders, Starmer, and he has done a good job of raising the fact that, they have been bombing inside Russia. They've taken a piece of Russia for ages. Crimea is under siege, and there's been no major, pushback in terms of a nuke or anything like that. So it's not that it's empty threats. It's still a threat. It's still concerning, but it's they haven't done much about it, and the Ukrainians have progressed.
And it's now thought that any decision regarding the permissions will be delayed until the UN General Assembly in New York next week, when President Zelensky will also present his victory plan. He says this week it's 90% done. We know really very little about what's going to be in it, don't we?
Very little, very little. I think his victory plan starts with another peace summit, hopefully in India, which hasn't agreed to do so. They had a peace summit in Switzerland. Major players didn't show, including India. And so I think that really what he's going to try and do to make this work is to get a gang up of nations on Ukraine's side, sort of pushing Putin to come on, let's talk at least, and let's get some of these things out of the way. But Putin is not going to be deterred at this point, in my opinion.
And when regarding that summit, when President Zelensky met the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he came away saying that they'd agreed that they wanted Russia invited to that.
Yes, I think Russia should be invited to that. But Putin says, "Here are my conditions: get all your troops out of the 4 provinces I want to seize, get them out." And of course, that's a no go for Zelensky and the Ukrainian people at this point.
I mean, at this sort of crucial time politically, it is a moment where the swirling influences of disinformation, information are at work, and we await details of that victory plan. An advisor to President Zelensky has this week dismissed a newspaper report in the tabloid German newspaper Bild that said he was willing to accept localized ceasefires on parts of the front line. The denial seems entirely plausible, given Ukraine would stand to lose so much in so doing. But it shows the information and the disinformation machine is in full force.
Full force. And, Russia would like nothing more than another Minsk stoppage of the war. That happened in 2014. And then we know what happened years later in 2022. And that was an arrangement to, okay, let's stop fighting. Let's talk about what we're going to do about this territory we've seized from you. And of course, it dragged on and on. It also did, however, allow Ukraine to build an army because it had virtually no army in 2014. And so, it's a different situation now. But to allow a piecemeal ceasefires, I think, is the thin edge of the wedge. It's distracting, and it's something that Russia would like to do. Now, the other thing that, of course, has changed since in recent months is the seizure of Kursk, and that to me is a bargaining chip in any negotiations. But Putin won't countenance that at this point anyway, publicly.
As the US presidential elections loom, official US policy towards Russian state media appears to be hardening. Meta has announced it's banning state owned or controlled outlets, television network, media group, news agencies that are controlled or owned by the state. How influential is the information war?
The information war is enormously influential. It provides the talking points for people that disagree with the war or with the Biden administration. One recent report was that one of the companies in Tennessee charged by or being investigated by the Department of Defense in the United States for this kind of thing has been feeding lines to this dreadful Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been speaking out, and also J.D. Vance is been using the same language, and Tucker Carlson. I mean, there's a whole cadre of them who are sympathetic to the Russian cause. And it's not that they're sympathetic with the Russian cause so much as they want to harm Biden's reputation.
Mm. Uh, just to touch on what the outgoing NATO Secretary General has said this week, Jens Stoltenberg, he told the Times that Russia was mortgaging its future to Beijing and is, of course, not getting this for free. On the subject of China, how long is China likely to want to support Putin in this war before it calls in on its debts?
Well, I think China's in a precarious position, and they're playing the waiting game. They're making a lot of money exporting all this technology to help them build weapons and missiles. They're getting cheap oil by the carload full, which is very beneficial for their economy. And China's not in great shape either, and they also face a lot of concern in the region about what they're doing concerning, vis-a-vis Taiwan. So they're mounting, large military operations in their own theater of the world, and so I think that they are playing the waiting game. My suspicion has always been, and I've written about it for months now, is that they will want Manchuria. They will want Manchuria, which was stolen from them by some czar 200 years ago. And that's an extremely valuable piece of real estate with lots of resources, and Vladivostok port and the Sakhalin Island. And so that is, I think, what they're going to want to take over in return, or if the center doesn't hold in Russia.
In terms of a deal or by aggression?
If the center doesn't hold, they'll just take it. If and by the way, the majority of the population living in Manchuria inside the Russian Federation are Chinese people.
Do you think President Putin feels threatened by this? Do you think it is very high on his agenda?
I don't think so. Look, he's played his cards pretty well, unfortunately. He's lit fires everywhere. I think he's also spread a lot of disinformation in the United States and paranoia about China invading Taiwan. I don't think China's going to invade Taiwan anytime too soon, but it's a distraction, and it's diverted American attention, diplomacy, and armed forces to that region. And it's been a useful ploy. But he's also lit fires in Venezuela. He's also lit fires most recently, and actually the worst war underway right now, which is the Sudanese civil war. He's been backing both sides in a civil war. He actually probably essentially started it. And that is very destabilizing for the Middle East and for Africa. And he's just and then of course he's got lots of countries in his alliance. I mean, the Syrian regime provided places for them to set up staging grounds to cause trouble for Israel in the Middle East. And he's got North Korea now supplying missiles. They're using missiles on Ukraine. He's a busy boy with his world war.
And in terms, oh, I like the way you call him a busy boy. That's probably being very, very kind. I like the Stoltenberg has also been warning about an emerging axis of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And we saw Russia hosting the North Korean foreign minister yesterday, while Russia's top security official Sergei Shoigu led a surprise visit to Iran. Do you think Russia is now in with these allies for the long run? Is it tangibly strengthening, or is it still a sort of alliance of convenience?
Well, it's a bunch of the bad boys getting together to help one another if, as, and when necessary. What's interesting is that China is very frightened of North Korea. It's a wild card. They've got a crazy leader there. He's got nuclear weapons, and the last thing they want is a renegade North Korea to start shooting around in that region, whether it's at China itself or Japan. So they have some concerns about it. But I think where Starmer has really hit the mark is that he has presented fairly the fact that this enormous delivery of powerful Iranian weapons to Russia is amounts to a brand new, worse escalation in that war. Yes, we know Russia's been bombing the heck out of Ukraine, but these weapons travel at the speed of light, and they sound or whatever, and they're going to be used to rain down on cities and energy infrastructure to make winter 2025 worse than ever for the Ukrainians. And so he has said this is an escalation, people. Starmer, and this is what he's saying to Biden. This represents another escalation. So if they escalate, we should escalate, and that's when he's making the case that the stormers should be used.
And the urgency, it cannot be greater in terms of the looming US presidential elections. An article in Foreign Affairs magazine outlines a potential security crisis for Europe under a Donald Trump presidency if that happens. It points to the potential of a US stripping back its commitment to NATO to defend Europe, withdrawing from NATO's military command, cutting aid to Kyiv. And it argues that this could spark divisions in Europe over its commitment to the survival, differences of opinion over its commitment to the survival of a strong Ukraine. It's far from reality, obviously, right now, because, how long is it? I don't know, weeks to the presidential election. But how should Europe be preparing for that potential scenario?
I think Europe has been sort of preparing for that, for a couple of years, as it became apparent that Biden was getting frail and older, and the election loomed. So there's been a lot of Trump proofing going on, ponying up more money, setting aside more weaponry, all and more diplomacy. The problem right now is that Britain is I think, thank heavens, stepping into a void that France and Germany have left. Poland is the moral leader of Europe. Poland has done a great job, the Scandinavians, but Britain is stepping up, and this is essential because France is preoccupied internally with their politics, and Germany is just plain dysfunctional and frightened from getting involved in a war again. So Europe has got to get its act together. There's no question.
Yeah, but having said that, that the EU appears to have come up with this plan to go it alone without the US, if necessary, to provide those billions of euros of loans to Kyiv, repaid by the profits on frozen Russian assets by the end of the year. This is Plan B, in case
Yes.
the US they fail to meet the conditions set by the US, which are being slowed down because Hungary is vetoing it all the time. It's an ingenious piece of bureaucracy, isn't it, at showing determination of the likes of the European Commission president to get things done.
It is, and it's morally, correct. The frozen assets have sat there, and Russia. It's a sort of a preemptive reparations that they're extracting on Russia by using these assets. There's legal hassles. It has to do with the European Central Bank concern that, if they go ahead with this at that scale, that anytime there's an enemy, people's assets are going to be, pulled out of European banks, undermining the value of the euro, all kinds of things. And of course, Mr. Orban is in there creating mischief. Frankly, I would put him on notice that he's not welcome anymore to be part of the European Union if he kiboshes this. This is really, really unacceptable. And he has no justification for it at all, except that he's a friend of Putin's and he gets all his natural gas from there. That can also be sorted out too. I'd like Ukraine to cut off all the natural gas from Russia to Hungary.
Mm.
They can do
On the
that.
subject on the subject of support, financial support towards Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, has actually announced 160 million euros will be allocated to meet humanitarian needs this winter from those profits, loans from the profits of frozen Russian assets. I'm just wondering, I mean, you mentioned earlier about the potential for the constant bombarding of the Ukrainians' energy infrastructure. That urgency is there now, isn't it? I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to go far enough, but the Ukrainians are facing a potentially very tough winter.
Yes, and so are the Europeans as a knock-on effect. If the cities are dramatically, if the bombing of the cities is dramatically stepped up, and their energy infrastructure even more eroded than it has been, you could find 4 million more Ukrainian refugees flooding into Europe because the heat and the lights won't be on. And so this is a near and present danger. The Europeans know this. They are very rich, and they're being pushed, and then they're concerned about the US. And by the way, Trump in the debate said that US that Europe had not given anywhere near as much money as the United States. That's actually untrue. If you include all kinds of aid, humanitarian and so on, the Europeans have outspent the Americans. The Americans are the principal military supplier, but that's what's going to have to change. And so I think I've heard of schemes where European countries who are timid about all of this are thinking about contracting with American defense contractors to buy weapons from them directly for their use to hand over to Ukraine, making one step removed from the actual transaction.
I'm just interested because in all your years as a journalist to have your perspective, and you talked about Donald Trump's claims being just simply not true. How much harder has it been in your career since you started to actually find out what the truth is?
It's good question. I mean, and you have the same problem. It's awful. You talk to people who are educated, whether it's Canadians, Americans, or Brits, or Europeans, and they come out with statements that are blatantly false. That they got off of Fox or some stupid podcaster or whatever. This is just a problem. It is a problem, and they're repeated over and over again. And there's no corroborating evidence. They don't care, but there's no way to combat it except to contrast it with your viewpoint, and then it becomes a matter of opinion rather than factual interaction. And this is a real danger that we've faced ever since the internet, and particularly social media, Facebook and X and all these things. They just spawn all these crazy conspiracy theories and falsehoods. It's the biggest challenge democracies face.
And in a recent Substack of yours, you describe Europe's moral leaders as Britain, Poland, Ukraine. How great do you see the potential that the longer the war goes on in Ukraine, that a growing impatience to see an end and domestic economic political pressures? What's the danger of that creating divisions in Europe?
Oh, I just dread to think. I don't think it can last indefinitely. There is a hard stop, and it's called Ukraine's demographics. They have lost so many people. The grim milestone last week was reached that in the total war, 1 million people have died, Russian and Ukrainian. We don't know all the Ukrainian figures in the military, but they're now starting to ask everybody who has immigrated out of Ukraine, even legally so, to come back and fight. Women are now being, put into frontline positions. They're running out of people. Putin is too, but he just goes to Siberia and drags a whole bunch more, you know, hapless teenagers, puts them in uniform as cannon fodder. So there are limits to Ukraine's staying power. Moralistically or morale wise, I should say, Ukraine is going to hold the course.
I mean, you're someone who has a deep love of Ukraine, and you've been there many times in your life and have an affiliation with it. Um, I suppose the question is, what is going to be left and how you rebuild the country once there is a peace.
Well, I'm not worried about that. Once there's peace, look, this is not the first rodeo that poor old Ukraine has been through. They've been overrun and invaded and occupied and, liberated multiple times in their history. They're resilient. They're very, very adaptable. They're smart and they're very united. And so, if the war ends, and hopefully it does, in whatever fashion, a real peace will bring automatic renewal and rebuild, and Europe, led by Germany, will write all the checks. This is not to me anything I worry about, but nobody is going to build a dam or replace an apartment building until we know that Putin has been put back in the cave he belongs.
Just on a subject of a recent meeting here in London in the UK, the head of the CIA and of MI6 gave a rare joint statement. In this, the CIA director, Bill Burns, noted that the Kursk incursion raised questions across the Russian elite about where this is all headed. How long do you think Putin can keep playing down the occupation of Kursk to his supporters?
He controls the disinformation inside his own cocoon. So I'm not sure that apart from word of mouth, a lot is getting to the Russian public. However, the caskets keep arriving. And the Kursk thing has spread throughout the population, if only because people in Kursk say, can I have a bedroom? I've just been kicked out by the Ukrainians of my house. So they haven't been able to control the messaging on that. But Putin's enormously powerful. Putin doesn't go unless he's forced to. And he has to be forced to by the inner circle. And there is discontent. The oligarchs don't have the power to remove him, but the inner circle, the Siloviki, they call them, they can do that. Don't see that happening as yet, but I think that the West also has to tighten the noose even more. I think gas exports have to be completely ended whenever possible, and the oil exports to India and China are floating the boat, and that's got to be stopped.
You were talking earlier about the kind of bad boy exploits carried out by Putin overseas and his interests in meddling in different countries. And I just wanted to ask you about Moldova because of the presidential elections that are taking place next month. And this is the first voting since the EU Commission opened accession negotiations. Russia will obviously want to kill all those aspirations, and it stands accused of interference in the electoral process there. Just how interested do you think the Kremlin is in Moldova, and what are the ramifications if it brings it back into its sphere of influence?
Well, it's very serious. Uh, Moldova is a separatist region that broke away. Transnistria, excuse me, is a narrow strip of land between Ukraine and Moldova. It broke away as a separatist region. It was allowed by Moldova to do so, but it was immediately populated by Russian troops. And they're using it as a staging ground for all kinds of, cyber stuff and espionage and that sort of thing. And and the foreign minister of Germany recently said publicly, Moldova is next. If Ukraine falls, Moldova is next. It's on his list. So
So
it's
Moldova's future is intrinsically linked to the future of Ukraine's.
it is, and as is Poland for that matter, and the others that border it. But this is a little tiny piece of land that's been locked in a frozen conflict, and it's going to be snapped up the minute that the Russians think they can get away with it. And it's not surprising, but I think the fact that they're being warned may help them elect the right uh, persons to run their country and to form the alliances they need to protect themselves.
So, what are the developments, Diane, that you'll be looking for from both the Ukrainian and the Russian camps as winter approaches and the fighting on the battlefield inevitably slows?
I think the war is aerial. The ground war is stalemated. They go an inch ahead, they inch back. Kursk is probably going to remain in Ukrainian hands unless they can utilize it somehow as a bargaining chip to negotiate for peace. So it's kind of a standstill, but the aerial war is very important. And so the bombing of civilians and infrastructure in Ukraine is something I watch. How many bombs are they unleashing? You know, it can't go on forever. How good is their air defenses? They're getting new Patriots. They have the F-16s. Let's see how that works. And then alternatively, how well are the special forces in Ukraine doing in terms of blowing up energy facilities, storage facilities, port facilities, bringing Crimea under complete siege, destroying the Kerch Bridge, and all the things they are already doing very successfully. I published a map in my Substack about the number of major oil refinery and oil facilities hits, and it has disrupted about a quarter of their entire oil production. And so, if they can continue to do that, but it's very dangerous work. And so, I think you're going to see that the aerial war, the drones and the bombs in Russia and in Ukraine are going to be what to watch for this winter.
And against that backdrop, the people that you are able to keep in contact with in Ukraine, how are they? What are they telling you?
They're tired. They're not giving up their resolve, but they're tired. Life has just not been normal, and they don't see an end to this necessarily in a hard way. And they feel, they're absolutely dedicated because they feel, and I actually do too, that his intention is to erase Ukrainians off the map of the earth. I don't think this is about, anything other than that. He is a very odd person, and that's what he's doing, which is why he just doesn't care about breaking all the rules of war and bombs hospitals and schools. And it's hard, but they hang in there. They're amazing.
And what are you able to say in terms of support or any optimism you can give?
I cry a lot.
I'm sorry, Diane. You okay? Yeah. Well, when sending, go on.
No, it's very emotional.
Well, I hope the people that you keep in contact are safe, and it's good to hear that they are resilient as well. And I know that they appreciate that you speak out and you speak on Frontline for us. Really appreciate you spending time with us. Diane, if you want to read Diane's latest Substack, just she is a prolific writer. She doesn't give up. She's as resilient as the people she keeps in contact with in Ukraine. Her latest piece is on the situation in Lebanon, actually, and it's called Israel's Titanic, and you can find it on her Substack now. Diane Francis, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now or listen to Times Radio or go to thetimes.co.uk. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye-bye for now.